I was profoundly influenced by Professor Howard Hendricks when I was at Dallas Theological Seminary. Some of you will still know his name because he had a huge impact on many people. He may have been the finest pedagogue, communicator, a teacher I've ever known. He was just remarkable. And I remember his gestures and his demeanor and stories. And he wrote a little book, a little tiny book on Elijah. And I kind of pulled it up. It's an old book, these old covers and so a tiny little thing, but it really is so powerful. Confrontation, conflict, and crisis. So I thought I would pull out a couple thoughts from my old prof's memoirs here and walk you through them. And one of the things that Hendricks rightly says is that man chooses an individual on the basis of what he is. But God chooses an individual on the basis of what he is to become. And that's a huge, huge difference, you see. So here we have a man who's becoming. You have a becomer. And you even have a preparation with in 1 Kings 17 that we saw a few weeks ago when he is fed by the ravens and that God brings him aside, calls him for a ministry to challenge. It's a challenging thing and he has to prepare him and he has to take care of him. And so as a result of this, in fact, before that you have him with this going from this brook of Kerith, then going up to Sidon. And he then is kind of protected by God during this time. And so God provides for his servant. And remember, he made the prophecy that there would be no rain. And then he takes off. And so he's being provided for by this brook until it dries up. And then the ravens are feeding him. And then God gives him instructions to go off to and from there, the brook Kerith, and all the way up here. Now, why there? I have no idea. Nor does anyone have any idea. In the economy of God, it's very difficult to be sure how all this works. But he goes way, way up then from this dimension here, where he's way south, and goes north up to this Zarephaim. And so it's by Tyre and Sidon, way north in that area. And then he takes care of, and in fact, he heals this widow's son who is providing for him. So it's a very powerful story of his ministry and his witness. In some ways, you might almost think of Elijah as like John the Baptist, and Elisha is kind of more parallel to the ministry of Jesus. But it's an intriguing picture that you have. And then after that account, he is then brought, and having been made ready for conflict, he is sent down to Mount Carmel, which is in this area here, so just on right off the Mediterranean Sea. And there will be the battle of the gods, we might as well call that. Gosh, it sounds like something on TV now, But the battle of the gods is what's going to happen. And we're going to see an incredible story, really, in our account of how after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year. So this woman, after she saw that her son was alive, then the woman said, "Now I know that you're a man of God, that the word of the Lord is in your mouth is true." So it's kind of establishing him for what he's about to have now. He's being prepared for conflict. And now he is going to be in the midst of conflict. It happened after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, "Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth." Now, just to give you a bit of a perspective on this, if we take a look at some of the components here, you've got, just to give you a feel for our book, again, the key word in our book is division, because it's during this period of time that you go from Saul's and then to David and then to Solomon. And then there is a diminishment because Solomon begins so well, and then this horrific diminishment whereby he is seduced and torn away. His heart is divided. As a consequence, his divided heart is the final straw that leads to the divided kingdom in 931 BC. and then it's divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. So that's just to give you some perspective on that. And the real key word then was division in this book. But essentially, though, the key verse, if you walk with me before me as your father David walked, in integrity of heart and uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded you, if you keep my statutes and judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever. As I promised David your father, saying, you shall not fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. This was the promise to Solomon, and Solomon began well, as we said, but his heart was torn aside. And then at the end, at the end of the condemnation, the Lord said to Solomon, because you have done this and have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. The pinnacle in this book is chapter 10, when the Queen of Sheba comes. The bottom of this book is in chapter 11, when his heart is carried aside. And the key chapter in verse 12 then is when, as a consequence of that, the United Kingdom then becomes the divided kingdom. Rehoboam leads a civil war, and 2 kingdoms, 2 capitals, and as well 2 religions, because they want to make sure that the northern 10 tribes, Israel, does not want the others to go back up to Jerusalem in Judah. So they actually create their own false religion as a consequence of that. And so it's a powerful book. 1 Samuel, we saw the kingdom was established. In 2 Samuel, the kingdom was consolidated. And in our book then, the kingdom begins with glory and ends in division and decline. So there's always this perspective that you need to keep in mind, that there is a motif, a theme that's running through the scriptures. And we see stories within that theme and cameos and images. And this is one of those stories that I think is very revealing and gives us lots of important messages. So he says, go show yourself to Ahab, who was the king then, and I will send rain on the face of the earth. So this is after the period of time then, 3.5 years, you remember, that this had happened. So it was a difficult time. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for when Jezebel destroyed the prophets of the Lord, you see, so Ahab's wife Jezebel is a very powerful woman and eager to actually accomplish and consolidate power, and she does this through her religion as well. So she destroyed the prophets of the Lord. Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and provided them with bread and water. Then Ahab said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we will find grass and keep the horses and mules alive and not have to kill some of the cattle because of the severity of the famine. So they divided the land between them to survey it. Ahab went one way by himself, and Obadiah went another way by himself. Now as Obadiah was on his way, behold, Elijah met him. And he recognized him and fell on his face and said, is this you, Elijah, my master? He said to him, it is I. Go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. And then I love his response. What sin have I committed that you're giving your servant into the hand of Ahab to put me to death? I love this. Not even an understatement. It's a strange humor and irony here. What have I done to deserve a warrant of death? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my master has not sent to search for you. And that may be why he was sent way up where he was, up in Tyre and Sidon, because that's one area so far away that they wouldn't have found him. But when they said he's not here, he made the kingdom or nations swear that they could not find you. So after all this time, Ahab, he's bent on finding this man who is opposed to his reign. And now he says, go say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. It'll come about when I leave you that the Spirit of the Lord will so he's saying that they're going to kill me. He's going to carry you to where I do not know, so that when I come and tell Ahab, he cannot find you. I love that. So God makes an interesting provision. I'm not sure if I've seen this anywhere else in the scriptures here, where I'm going to take this guy and hide him from you, and put him by the Spirit and leave you. He's going to carry you. It's not that he's going there. He's just going to carry him, and I won't know where it is. So he can't find you. He will kill me, though your servant have feared the Lord from my youth. And has it not been told my master what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, that I hid 100 prophets of the Lord by 50s in the cave and provided them with bread and water? So he's now saying, now say to your master, behold, Elijah is here. He'll kill me. So Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab, and so he trusted his life and entrusted himself to the prophet. And so he went up there and went to meet with Elijah. When Ahab saw Elijah, Obadiah survived that encounter. He said, I have not troubled. Is this you, the troubler of Israel? So immediately you see this whole idea, the question about the troubler of Israel. Who's the real troubler? Ahab, of course. He says, your father's house, because you've forsaken the commandments of the Lord, you've followed the Baals. So now send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel. So the trouble of Israel is Ahab, not Elijah. And the troubler is sin and disobedience to the mandates of God. The troubler is really a refusal to do what he called them to do. And as a consequence of that, their disobedience, their idolatry has so pervaded that they are now in a point of being under the judgment of God. Send and gather to me all Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. So you have, again, these gods, these brutal deities that are so common here. Here's an image of Baal, and another image. He was like the sun god, it was the sky god, it was the god of the heavens, and he would be one who was associated with fire as well. And that plays into this, because the God who speaks by fire, he's the true God. And then you had the Asheroth, which are over here as well. They're further up here. There you go. Lovely deities here, Astarte. And so here they're replacing the God of heaven with these gods of their own invention, of their own creation. And it is a vile diminishment that as a consequence has led them to this position of apostasy and rebellion against God. And so there's a confrontation then. Ahab sent a message among all the sons of Israel and brought the prophets together at Mount Carmel. So we have now this confrontation that takes place. Elijah comes near to all the people and said, now this is the first of 7 questions, so I want you to think about, there's 7 statements rather of Elijah that have a bearing on this. The first one is this, his statement in verse 21. How long will you hesitate between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him. But the people did not answer him a word. And it reminds me, doesn't it, of the whole idea, man cannot serve 2 masters. He's either going to be committed to one or to the other. You cannot serve God and wealth and as ends in themselves, or any other deity that you assume. So here's a portrait then of how he says, you're going to have to make a decision. A choice must be made. And it's going to be, what is the choice of your ultimate allegiance? I find myself now asking that question every day because of this thing that I did and continue to use. I'm going to throw it at you again and again, precisely because I want you to do it. This is what I used to do anytime before I speak or have a meeting. I always do this. I just remember, before I go into a meeting, I want to trust the Father by the Son, and the Son walk by the Spirit. But I also did this, even when I was sitting here. So while during your prayer, I was, what do I seek more than anything else? Who do you say who is Jesus to me now? And do I love him more than these? Because the choice is going to be made. He will brook no rival. And he's a jealous God, and the reason for that is because his jealousy is because he wants what's best for you, and he's jealous for your good. Not like a human misapplication of jealousy, but he's jealous for your well-being is the concept. And he hates it, just as a father would hate his teenage daughter to be brought into a position of being violated or compromised. That's the jealousy we're talking about. He wants what's best for us, even though we often do not choose what's best for us. And it hurts in some mysterious way. We can grieve the Holy Spirit. It's an astonishment that God has done that, where that somehow our obedience it really leads to his pleasure and our disobedience to his displeasure. Why would he even bother with us when we consider the sun, the moon, the stars, the heavens, and all that is in them? And you begin to realize the greatness of the living God. How can the God who made this, you see, you begin to look at this, and the God who made, this is the Webb telescope, all these wonders and marvels and so forth. How can the God who made this be jealous and concerned? Clusters of galaxies everywhere, beyond our imagination, things they didn't even know. They had knowledge to some degree. I mean, they understood something about the Milky Way. I mean, they could see that because it was a beautiful thing to see, and they see it better. They could see it better than we can with their skies. But still, they didn't know. You only see a few thousand stars, and after that, that's about it. You would never dream, never imagine, never conceive that it would be that there's much more, so much more than this. And so it's an amazing story that we see that the power of God is at work in revealing himself to us in ways we could have never even dreamed or imagined before. And I show you these photos only to, again, as a reminder of the God we serve is not someone who is made by some human image, as if he was responsible to or even controlled by our decisions or by our worship. You think the one who made this, who controls all this, is going to be subject to that? Yet he chooses, yet he decides, yet he confirms that he loves us and wants what's best for us. He made us in his image, and this is the thing, being an image bearer. You are the pinnacle of his creation. And it's not a question of size, as we know. It never is. We always look at time and dimensions of life through metrics that are inaccurate, you see, because it's the size of a thing. Is that related to its value? When you consider if there's a little 2-year-old toddler and you're at the Grand Canyon, and you're all amazed at the spectacle that you behold, and suddenly someone notices that your child's missing. Suddenly, this is trivial compared to that little kid. You understand that it has to do not with the size of a thing, but with the thing itself, the person it is, who is an image bearer. You are in the image of God, and you will judge angels. You will be above the angels. It's very hard for me to imagine that, because if you saw an angel manifest at all in this room, we would all be on our faces. Yet you will judge them. Think of the dignity that he's calling you to. That's why sin is beneath the dignity of the person you've been called to be. It's beneath it. There's no future in it, and it's not who you are. It's not compatible. You stop serving two masters. And so at the end of the day, we were invited constantly to choose the temporal versus the eternal. We must choose the eternal because that contextualizes the temporal. And when we choose the first things first, everything else falls in its proper place. So if he's Lord, follow him. If Baal, follow him. The people did not answer him a word. Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. And so in verse 22 then, what he now says, he talks about the problem, and then he gives them a proposal. So there's only one left, and yet 450 prophets of Baal. Now his proposal, let them give us 2 oxen. Let them choose 1 ox for themselves and cut it up and place it on the wood. But put no fire under it, and I will prepare the other ox and lay it on the wood. And I will not put a fire under it. Then you will call in the name of your God, and I will call in the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God. And all the people said, that's a good idea. Maybe not the best translation, in my opinion. I don't think it would have been put quite that way. But you see, because Baal, again, this is supposed to be the Lord of fire. This is supposed to be the God of fire, the God of the heavens and so forth. And he has power in his right arm and so forth. So this is the confrontation that he has. So he says, If he's the Lord of heaven, then he's the Lord of fire, and this is what we will do. So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, and this is his third statement that we find, and it's found in verse 25, you go first. Basically, you go first. Choose one ox for yourselves, prepare it first for your many, call on the name of your God, but put no fire under it. Then they took the ox which was given them, and they prepared it and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon. I mean, these people were serious. I mean, I have to tell you, and it's amazing to me that if sincerity saves, these people would have been saved. I can promise you, because watch what these people do. They leaped about the altar. It came out at noon that Elijah mocked them and called out with a loud voice. So don't tell me that there's not humor in Scripture. He says, call out with a loud voice. He's a god. Either he's occupied or gone aside, which is amazing. Maybe his hearing is difficult, you see. Maybe it's call a little louder. Or maybe he's just on a journey or something like that. Or maybe he's occupied. Or maybe he's asleep. Maybe wake him up. So they got it. That even instigated them even more. They cried with a loud voice. They cut themselves according to their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out of them. When midday was past, they raved until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. But there was no voice. No one answered, and no one paid attention. And that makes me think of a text of Scripture that is pretty important. I think about the Psalm 115. There are multiple examples of this, but when it speaks about, oh, Israel, trust in the Lord. Well, let's just go down here. Not to us, to your name be the glory. Where now is their God? But our God is in the heavens. He does whatever he pleases. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of man's hands. They have mouths, but they cannot speak. They have eyes, but they cannot see. They have ears, but they cannot hear. They have noses, but they cannot smell. They have hands, but they cannot feel. They have feet, but they cannot walk. They cannot make a sound with their throat. And those who make them will become like them, everyone who trusts in them. So trust in the Lord. And, whenever I've been to these temples and so forth, and I've been to various temples when I was in the East, and I know, Stuart, you've been to multiple places like that, and sometimes we've talked about this, there's a spirit of oppression. When I was in Chennai, India, I couldn't go into that Hindu temple. It was just too oppressive. There are various times, but when I see these gods, and I see what they bring, the offerings, they bring flowers, they bring food, and of course nobody ever takes that stuff. No one ever takes it away. And so what happens is, gods don't consume. So later on, when no one's around, I guess they replace it and empty it out again, because they know very well they're not going to eat it. So it's just, they're inadequate, they're inept, they're not capable. Trust in the Lord, he's your strength and your shield. That is the God who you are to call upon. So the contrast couldn't be greater. So we go back to our text in 1 Kings 18. And so he says, so this great situation here. It's let's see. No one paid attention. Elijah said to all the people. So he's basically said, your gods are inept. And anyone who becomes like them, you are incapable. They are not able to act on your behalf. Trust in the one who made all things, not an image of humanity, but rather we are in his image. And because we are image bearers, as we said before, you are a spiritual being, because God is spirit. And those who serve him and worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. So you're a spiritual being having this earthbound embodied experience, and you're being prepared clearly for home, because you're not home yet as an alien and a pilgrim. You're a stranger and a wanderer in this world. We often don't think of ourselves. We get so tethered to this planet, and we begin to serve gods of our own imagination and making, and suppose that they will deliver us, rather than realizing that it is not that which is going to save us. It's the one who loves us, who woos us, pursues us, and wants us for himself, and therefore says, put away these foreign gods. Put away anything that is a rival to me. And I would define a God in this way then. Anything that comes between you and him. Do you love me more than You fill in the blank. It could be your grandkids. It could be your career. It could be your health. And if you love him more than those, because anything you love more than him becomes like an idol. You're worshiping and serving something in the creation rather than the creator, and it will never serve in that respect. So given this notion then, he mocks them. And so having done that then, Elijah said to all the people, and this is verse 30 then, this is his next statement here. Yeah, this incredible sincerity that these people have. By the way, there's one note I wanted to make before I go to this fifth statement in verse 33. That faith is only as good as the object in which it's placed. So everybody lives by faith. You have to remember this. Everybody lives by faith. You've already made a lot of faith decisions this day on your drive over here. A lot of them. More than you know. And we know, too, that our lives are very thin in terms of being held in the thinnest of gossamer threads. We know that. But it is to choose. Faith is a universal experience, but it's only as good as the object in which it's placed. So if it's not a worthy object, it will let us down every time. And I think that's really what we're dealing with here. So in this verse, in this text then, we see then that Elijah then, as his fourth statement in verse 30, he says, come near to me. So the people draw near to him. And he repairs the altar of the Lord, which has been torn down. So they were not using the altar of the Lord. And then the fifth statement in verse 33. 33. So he took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob. That's a significant statement because although the kingdom has been divided, it's still an acknowledgement that all the 12 tribes are part of Israel. And so Israel will be your name. So with these stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. Then he arranged the wood and cut the ox in pieces and laid on the wood. This is a really very dramatic display here. He said, fill 4 pitchers with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. He was a showman. Do it a third time. The water flowed around the altar, and it also filled the trench with water. And then we have this great prayer that takes place in beginning verse 36. And it is a great image here. At the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Israel. So he's a God of history, a God who's been with them, a God who is not just in their own imagination, but he's acted in history. He's manifested himself to his people. He's communicated, and he's provided for them, and he's done signs and wonders. I am your servant, and I've done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord. Answer me that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their heart back again. A very short and succinct prayer. Radically different from these people who are cutting and gashing themselves and crying out and doing whatever they can do to try to get the attention of these deities that have no senses, no ability to respond. And so he prays, he offers this prayer up to God, and then this dramatic, simple, short prayer of confidence. Because consider, 450 prophets against him, and all the people are suspicious, and he's up against this many people. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust. You see, this is not just only the offering. It even includes the stones around it. This is a pretty intense fire. And this is an intense display of the holiness of God and the sinfulness of sin. Licks up the water, and when all the people saw it, what did they do? They fell on their faces and they said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And that's the most important thing you could do, is to establish that understanding. And then so that in the seventh statement is a statement of judgment. Elijah, in the seventh statement, seized the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape. So they seized them. Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slew them there. So you have some pretty amazing things that are going on here, some great, amazing stories. And then at the end, Ahab, go up, eat and drink, he says to Ahab the king. Now, Ahab must have been very impressed with this thing. Who could not be impressed at this display of 450 prophets? And they can't do a thing. One short prayer of confidence. But he also, he sets it up just to make sure you don't think that there's any kindling under there. I'm going to fill it once, twice, 3 times. The whole trench is filled with water, so that it's a completely obvious, demonstrable statement of the presence of the living God. And so in this statement, then Ahab knows the Lord is God, and yet now it comes down to the point of stubborn rebellion, because there's a point where people can go and past the point of all return. And I think this is what had happened with him. There are people who know in their hearts, but they refuse in their actions. Ahab went up to eat and drink. So he says it's going to be a roar of a heavy shower after 3.5 years. He went up to the top of Carmel. He crouched down on the earth and put his face between his knees. Very dramatic image. Go up now, look toward the sea, he says to his servant. He went up and looked and saw there is nothing. Go back 7 times, he tells him. So it's this 7-time process, and then the 7th time, that is going to be when the cloud as small as a man's hand is coming up from the sea. So he said, go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, so that the heavy shower does not stop you. In a little while, the sky grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a heavy shower. Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. Then the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and outran Ahab to Jezreel. Now, that's a pretty impressive achievement for this guy to do, to outrun that. And to give you the sense of what we're dealing with here, this is Mount Carmel up here, and all the way to Jezreel, which is over here. So this whole area here, that's a big run. So you see this amazing work of God in this man's life. And there are some things that emerge from this text that I would like to bring to your attention as I consider the life of this great prophet. A man who was prepared by God, who started this ministry and this mission, and a man who also honored him in all that he sought to do. A man who paid a dear and a great price for doing so. But if we go to James, the text we saw before, we looked at James and we saw that therefore pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain. And it did not rain in the earth for 3 years and 6 months. Then he prayed again, and the sky poured rain, and the earth produced its fruit. So again, going back to this image here, he makes his declaration to Ahab, and then God provides for him. He hides him, first in this area here, and then up here. He appoints this widow to take care of him and serve him, and it's a great symbiotic relationship until the child dies. Elijah heals her son, then she knows that you are indeed a man of God. So it's like an establishment. Yes, you are the man of God. And then the conflict, he's now ready for the conflict which takes place at Carmel. And then he goes up to Jezreel. So there's a powerful story of several things I'd call to your attention. One thing that I'd say is that divine mathematics are not the same as human mathematics. You know that, but we need to be reminded of it because we so often forget this. The fact is that in numbers, how many prophets were there? You got one guy against all these others, and what few prophets there were was small in number. But it was not the number, but it was actually their fidelity that you have also. When I think about Jesus, he did not really spend much of his time proportionately with the crowds. In fact, as his ministry progressed, less and less time with the multitudes and more time with a handful of men who would change the world and turn it upside down. So it was not the numbers, it was the heart of the people who were there. This is why I've said when I think about the 4 soils, I've shown you this before, but the four soils are these. The soil beside so the seed is the same. Some is tossed beside the road. There's no response. Some on the rocky ground, brief but gone. Some among the thorns, some with the good soil. And what I see in these metrics, these numbers, is a very small number of people who are in the good soil. A tiny, tiny number indeed. So from a human point of view, not much, because if you really think, and my desire for you is that you be a fourth soil man, but you be a man who does that. It's not many. So do you want that? Does your heart long for that? Because you need to then eschew the other idols of anything else and realize God is the one that is your heart and your soul. And it's the same way, another way of looking at it, those who reject the gospel, those who ignore it, those who compromise, and those who embrace. Same sequence there. There's a process where we see a diminishment in people's lives. And so, as I see it then, for you, my desire is for us to be the good soil and to realize it's not what we can do, the question is what God can do. And He can do something in a small band of men. He can do that in a small fellowship. So what I realized, though, what really helped me, from an earthbound point of view, this is a tiny number. From a heavenly view, it's huge. Why is that? Because the fourth soil bears 30, 60, 100-fold. So that's the incalculably diffusive influence that you cannot quantify, you can't count, you can't measure it, but God knows. And that is why I say to you that most of your true impact, in fact, perhaps almost all of it, I think, in this life is hidden. We won't really know the fullness of our impact until we see it in the Father's house. But your impact can be very vast, can be very great. So it is something that we have to keep in mind then. Don't be impressed by the numbers that people are impressed by. And realize that true fame is not how many people know your name, it's how many people have been touched by your life. And you can't know that, you can't measure that. So don't use the metrics of attendance, buildings, and cash, ABC. Buildings, budgets, and body counts. Nickels and noses. All these earthbound measurements, because people like that so much, but it's just a reminder, though, that remember that that's the case. Think about Numbers chapter 13 as well, when you think about this, that it is the reality of Numbers 13. Remember, they sent out the 12 spies. What was the minority report? That in spite of their numbers, we can win this land because God's called us here. What were their names? Joshua? And who was the other one? Now, can any of you name the other 10? Why can't you? They faded into history and into anonymity. See, their deeds are gone. God honors His own. And it'll either be in this life, in most cases it will not be into the next life when they're honored. Yes, Steve. Yes, in this it was an immediate judgment as a consequence. Yeah. That's the seriousness of the death-dealing idolatry, that it is like a cancer that is, and then remember, and this is critical for us to realize, that it is the God of the universe who made life who has the right to destroy it and to take life. He gives and He takes. It is not like a man. He is not a man. And so He is the one who gives and He takes. And it is a revelation of His judgment. Why is so much happening now? He's waiting for all to come to repentance. But there comes a point where grace is over. And now it will take place. And so Jesus said, in the days before the coming of the Son of Man, it'll get worse. And I think we're seeing those kinds of things happen. But rather than wringing my hands, I realize this is what I think our Lord was telling us to do. He's telling me, put your hope in something that's going to last, that's going to endure. And that to me is really quite critical here. So I want you to be a person who then lives above that line and who then sees that you are called to be faithful and you will be a minority. And it'll be more and more of a price you'll have to pay for your fidelity to the gospel. I believe a time is coming very soon that it may be in many instances a choice coming up between your convictions and your career and other things of this nature. So I do not know. But what I do know this is that while we have opportunity, while we have life, while we have breath, we are called to do what God calls us to do. It is right now that we have this opportunity. So when I think of Galatians, at the end of Galatians, and he tells us then, let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. You are here for a reason, and he has work for us to do. And you must think about what you want to pursue, what you want to accomplish for the living God. And rather than a person who pursues his own enterprises, it becomes everything I touch, everything I do, I want it to be in him and through him. So I can do my work, my business to the glory of God by actually serving God and worshiping him in the small decisions and the ways I treat my customers and clients, my fellow workers. We can do everything matters, but instead of just seeing that you're just here to do this, you're here for a larger reason. God's given you an arena of influence, a sovereign arena of influence. And that arena of influence then is such that you can manifest eternal values to those people who see you and who watch you. You're a living testament, an epistle. So that when you, because of the quality of your life then, live a quality of life that demands an explanation. This to me is a critical point. So in 1 Peter, he presumes something that's interesting. If we sanctify Christ as Lord in our hearts, always being ready to make a defense to anyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that's in you, but do it with gentleness and do it with reverence. And so this to me is really the key here, is to realize that they're presuming something about you. You do it serving him well. But they're asking to give you an account for the hope that is in you. There's a quality about you that asks them to wonder, what is it about you? Why do you hold up instead of fold up? What is it about you that does this? And so when you're living a life that demands an explanation, and that's only when you can be, and you're walking by the Spirit as we're doing our work then, in that respect, you do this then with gentleness and reverence, and you're ready to explain that, and you're a witness to the world, to a world that is now fallen, and you have an opportunity to see something that is really profound. And finally, I would say that God uses a man not according to his ability, but according to his availability. And that to me makes a big difference. So it's not what abilities we've been given. We all have different capacities. And each of us have different spheres of influence to which we are called to do. But it is according to your ability. And that's why, as I see it, we have been given a high and holy calling. Ephesians 2:10. We know that it's by grace that we've been saved through faith, that not of ourselves, it was the gift of God, not as a result of works that no one may boast. We know that text, but then remember this verse 10. We are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we would walk in them. So remember this then, that this is what you've been called to be. And you're called to be, it's required of a steward that he be faithful to the opportunities that God has granted you. So the problem is not your ability, the problem is your availability. And so with me, I have to ask myself that question again. Here am I, send me. And am I willing to take the risk? Because I know it will be through many tribulations that we must enter into the kingdom of heaven. There's going to be adversity. I see it coming up ahead, but are we called to live a life of fidelity and recognize that what matters is our relationship with God and the sphere in which he's called us to minister, that he calls us to be agents of grace in this time. Any questions you've got? Any observations? Yes, Steve?
Ahab at that point killed like 800, 400 prophets and another 400 that immediately were killed at that site?
Yes, you're saying how many, the people who were killed at the site there, yes, right. There was a judgment right there.
The amazing thing is told him to get the chariot up and running. And he ran, who knows how many miles?
Yeah, it was quite a distance. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes there's a bit of an understatement. There are plenty of those in Scripture. But again, it shows the awesome power of the living God that goes beyond our expectations and is the ruler of time and space and can do things that we cannot actually imagine. But really, we're asking God when we are involved in sharing the good news or by word and by works. And so we manifest and we love people and serve them with eternal values at heart. We are invited to do something that requires the power of the living God for that to take place. You grow your faith when you commit yourself to something that will fail if God doesn't show up. And sharing the gospel is one of those. It'll fail if he doesn't show up. Yes.
I mean, you have to think about the faith that Elijah had sitting there with 850 people looking at him.
It's unbelievable.
Knowing that if that didn't happen, he'd be dead. Because, Ahab had a price on his head to begin with. And I think the second point is, if I'm Ahab, I'm even more impressed that it started raining right after.
Yeah.
Right, that Elijah essentially called in the rain.
Yeah, it's interesting too, and we don't have answers to this, why 7 times he sends the servant. He's crouching down and waiting. It's like this anticipation. This is after 3.5 years. This is a big sign. And when that happens, 7th time he begins to see a little thing, and then he warns him, go now before it catches up to you. It's a pretty powerful thing. Then he outruns him. It's a beautiful text in many ways, very powerful portrait of a microcosm of a larger whole, because all of us will be judged. Whether in this life, there's judgment, but some escape judgment, it would seem. There are consequences, but no one escapes the judgment, the justice of God. And
in light of all that, Ahab didn't just fall.
You would expect Ahab to fall on his face. I would have. If I saw something like that with this man, with that boldness, and to see the absurdity of the human religions, the contrast couldn't be greater, the way he taunts them and so on. Maybe he's relieving himself. It's actually a hint in the text that he's doing that. Or maybe he can't hear. Or maybe you just need to do something like that. Or maybe he went on a journey. In other words, you'd have to be an idiot to worship some object of your own making, your own machinations. It's right here. Yet we do. We worship the idols, the creations of our hands. It amazes me, yeah. There are times when we need to be taken down a few notches and to realize who's God and who's not. To realize we're not in control of anything. And to realize we never were, and we don't even know what's our best interests. And there are times that are reminders like this. There are physical episodes, there are spiritual things that happen in our lives. But we're all engaged in a warfare. The more serious you get, the more opposition you'll have. This story here, though, illustrates the hardness of the hearts of men. Apart from the grace of God, we would all continue to be in a Christless modality. We just, in spite of all evidences to the contrary, Ahab obviously continued to buy a false narrative. We are joined to our idols, it seems.